Welcome, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Katamas, and it is Saturday Night Live for the Global Peace Tribe. This is our early Zoom room show. So if you're watching this, that means you are part of our tribe. You're part of the family. And I want to invite people to please let us know where they're located, your geographic location. And right off the bat, I see some of our wonderful regulars, Scotty and John and James and Eleanor Linenleaf. You're all wonderful. You're always like right in there. You know the score at this point. So it is the International Peace Weekend, and we are so happy to be collaborating with Ben Bowler. Ben, of course, is Unity Earth. He has been kind of on our show a couple times now, and he's a wonderful person to collaborate with. And almost everyone you're going to meet tonight is someone that Ben has brought onto the show. So Ben, I'm going to bring you on along with me right now, and welcome.
Fantastic. Wonderful, Scott. So great to be here with you and Deborah and the Saturday Night Alive team. And yeah, we got something very, very special coming together in honor of the International Day of Peace and Peace Weekend. And there's so many different elements of this running together. We're with the visionaries and the peacemakers that were instrumental in the early observance of the International Day of Peace right back in the early 1980s. Avon Madison, the co-founder of Pathways to Peace, is going to be with us. We're also going to be hearing from Jeremy Gilley, the founder of Peace One Day. And people might know Jeremy through his movies and Peace One Day documentary, which really catalogs his quest to dedicate a day of ceasefire and nonviolence. This is going back in 2000 when he went on his big odyssey around the world, really, to the United Nations, and he had a lot of support from various celebrities, and he went all the way up to Kofi Annan at the time, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he was able to, catalyze what became the UN resolution in 2001, which forever fixed the date of the International Day of Peace to be September 21st. And prior to that, while there was an International Day of Peace, it was sliding around the calendar, and it was the third week of September, and then it was the opening of the UN General Assembly. It was kind of a little fluid, still a very powerful history. But those two aspects coming together on the show tonight are really deeply significant. In fact, Scott, last year we had the Caravan of Unity across America leading to Peace Weekend, and we wanted to bring Jeremy and Avon together for that, but it didn't quite work out last year. So super excited that it's happening this year. And we have public intellectual Jonathan Granoff and Reverend Deborah Moldo, of course, Opium Moon, and so much more amazing music. So there's a lot to look forward to.
So I'd like to invite Jonathan to come on and join us. And I want to bring forward kind of a dynamic question. And the question is going to be through you, and if Jonathan's willing to join us, Jonathan. But it's also a question for all of you watching. We've got 75 people already in the Zoom room, and most of you now are regular, beloved members of our Global Peace Tribe. And it's, of course, beautiful to talk about peace. And of course, we all say we want peace. But I sure am observing within the couples that I coach, many of the businesses that I work with, many of the families that I work with, there's a real lack of peace. There's a lot of polarization. And people are very adamant about certain belief systems, about masks or no masks, vaccine or no vaccine, social distancing or no social distancing, let alone politics. Now, I'm not wanting us to go into politics, and I'm definitely not wanting to open us up to present any of our belief systems. Okay? I'm not interested in that. I don't want us to devolve into that. What I do want us to talk about is how can we create peace by accepting, listening, understanding those people in our orbit who have different belief systems, holding to our own integrity. But if, we've all heard peace, peace begins with me. Peace begins in my relationships with my family, with my roommates, with the people that I work with. So given all the polarization that's happening in our world right now, I'll give the focus on me because Ben's got a phone call. This is a really real issue. And I thought in today's Zoom Room show, I want to talk about this because it's beautiful to celebrate peace in all the ways that we're going to, and to celebrate the people that are on the show tonight that are active peacemakers in the world. But how can we do that within our own immediate orbit, especially in this time of polarization? So I'm going to bring Ben back on. I think Ben's ready. And Ben, do you want to introduce Jonathan to our audience? And then I'd love to hear Ben and Jonathan's response. And then I'll read some of the responses from our Zoom room members to my question.
Yeah, beautiful, Scott. Well, thank you. It's my honor to introduce Jonathan Granoff. And the subject matter is one about which he is qualified deeply to speak. And this idea of inner peace to outer peace is one that is of central importance perennially. It's always the topic of discussion. And particularly as we come to celebrate the International Day of Peace, which for some is about, ceasefire, stopping wars, ending conflict. That's one level of our understanding of peace, but there are so many other levels to the understanding of peace, all the way through from the personal through to the profound. And Jonathan is perhaps one of the best speakers in the world on this subject. So we're very blessed to have him. I'll do his full introduction when we get into the live segment of the show. But for now, he is a deeply wise, a spiritual servant, and really blessed to have him with us. And my dear friend, Jonathan Granoff.
Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you.
Brother Scott, I wasn't quite sure what your question was, actually. You said you wanted to talk about peace in the world without talking about politics, and I wasn't sure. And then you were talking about peace in the world and peace with the people that are in your immediate environment. And then there's also the subject of how does one individually find the source of peace within themselves. And there may be similar principles for all of these, but it is utterly impossible to talk about peace unless it's approached holistically. That one of the principles of peace is integration of all human activity. If you have peace in your heart and you don't bring it into action, it will wither into mere sentiment. If you try to act in the world and think that you can act bringing peace in the world and be in a state of conflict within yourself, you're living in an illusion. But there's no way to talk about peace in the world without addressing institutions that human beings create to express their value, their power relationships amongst each other, our relationship to the natural world. And there's no way to talk about our relationship to the natural world without talking about how we feed ourselves, how we move our bodies from one place to another, how we heat our houses. And that enters into the realm of politics and law, because the institutions that guide those activities are not natural institutions like you, Scott. You're a natural institution. God made you. But you and I and our brothers and sisters, each day we recreate the state. We recreate the institutions that create how we feed ourselves, how we move from place to place. So you can't fragment any of the human endeavors. But your question had multiple questions in it. So maybe if we broke it down to what is the core principle for being in the midst of a world in conflict and making your own being a sanctuary of peace from which to act in the field of relativity in a beneficial way, starting with the individual and then moving to community. And then, of course, You have to move to the institutions of law and power that we create.
Yeah, so thank you. And right off the bat, I'm so appreciating all the things that you've said. And I guess in my world, I am observing a lot of polarization. And before we can create peace in the political parties and the structures and the large things, just how we relate to each other. And very specifically, during this time of pandemic, what we have in common is we all want safety, we all want to be healthy, and we all want personal freedom. But there's very different strategies about how to make that happen. And so I see people, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends, parents and children, in violent arguments over vax, no vax, mask, no mask, social distancing, no social distancing. And everybody wants the same thing. They all want health. They all want safety. They all want, but there's such radically different strategies. And there is clearly a social media civil war taking place. And so I'm wanting to address the very real challenge that most of us are facing with this topic of how do we create peace in the world. So that's the question I'm asking. And of course, I want to riff on and then turn it back over to you and Ben. But I just want to emphasize, you're right. I mean, of course, we have to have peace within ourselves. Otherwise, preaching peace is bullshit. It's not authentic. We have to find that within ourselves so that we can come to our relationships, come to conflict and differences in a peaceful way. So absolutely. So I'm going to turn it back over to you and Ben, and then I am going to read some of the wonderful, wonderful things that I see that Charlotte and Wanda and Moses and many of our other Dr. and Mrs. Future are writing. So I am going to read some of those too, but I'll go back to you.
Let's start out with some principles. First, the Buddha's first truth is there is suffering. The world is not heaven. From that is the way out of the suffering, ironically, is by compassion, is recognizing that all beings will suffer old age, sickness, and death, that all beings are very fragile, that all beings suffer, and then feeling the suffering of others as part of oneself. That's the first point. And the main cause of suffering is believing in things that don't satisfy the peace that the soul is craving. That's called idolatry or Maya, illusion. Believing and following things that won't satisfy. What satisfies the heart? What brings confidence? What brings security? This isn't new. Loving kindness, compassion, tolerance, respect for other lives. And within those qualities is a level of consciousness capable of understanding the perspective of others. But it is very important to know the difference between what is true and what isn't. And it isn't true that the election of Joe Biden was a fraud. It's not true. It isn't true that the scientists explaining that if we continue burning fossil fuel, we will destroy the viability of civilization for future generations. And it isn't true that we don't have a responsibility to them. We have a responsibility to future generations. It isn't true that whatever belief system one has, whatever it is, it permits one to violate the peaceful coexistence with others. So there are things that we have to uphold as truths for us. Because if we throw out truth, we will then throw out the compass of ought. What ought we do? What ought we get to? When Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to talk about this later, but I think it's a really important point. That's our responsibility. And this audience is full of people with open hearts, with the capacity to know what we ought to do and not to allow the poison of cynicism to temper and compromise their clear vision. When Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," and we now know he didn't just mean men, he also meant women. But when he said it, men without property didn't have full citizenship. People of color didn't even have their humanity. They were property in most of the country. Women were not included, but that's not true today. That ought has become a compelling magnet for social justice and a principle concordant with the principles of compassion and equity. So there are principles of ought that, although we don't see them immediately, we must strive to bring them into effect. And the most important principle, and I'll stop, is the principle inherent in the Golden Rule, which is not just prescriptive and not just found in every tradition of wisdom on the planet and religion. It's also descriptive, because on a deep level, the self that is Scott and the self that is Jonathan is one. The life within my life and the life within your life that emanates grace to all lives is one. And the way we treat others, we're literally treating part of ourselves. And we know that if you have hatred and anger within yourself, you will treat others with hatred and anger and arrogance and judgmental. And if you have found the wellspring of loving kindness and compassion within yourself, you will bring that into the world. And that's a principle that's really important. So I think one of our tasks today, Scott, is to find principles that are universal, that for those of goodwill, we can find common ground. Now, there is evil. There are people who are violent and are not trying to be honest, who are questing for power over others. And you can't just pretend that they don't exist. They're damaged, they're hurt, and they're disconnected. And we have to realize that the animal qualities that they're worshiping are dangerous. Doesn't mean to treat them with lack of dignity and respect, but we cannot deny that if there are not laws to constrain their behavior, they will kill other people without remorse.
Thank you. Thank you for that's very rich. And I'm going to read some of the comments from our presenters. I invite you to take a look because there's some questions there for you, Jonathan. We've got about 6 minutes left, but I want to read some of the wonderful comments because I'm really wanting to include more and more. All of you, we've got well over 100 people, 110 people in the Zoom room. So Janet Connell writes, how to live in the world, but not be of the world. Wanda writes, it's about our spiritual path, our journey, not politics. I agree. Lynn and Leaf write, we need to increase personal practice and spirituality with living a life guided by our voice within us. Beautiful. Doreen writes, respect that everyone makes decisions from 3 things: experiences, learned knowledge, and the consciousness level. And no 2 people have the exact same view. Thank you, Doreen. Charlotte writes, peace is a practice, a choice, and a series of choices. To cultivate stillness and quietness within ourselves and to be able to return to that place, especially when things try to pull us out of that state. To be able to step back, breathe, resist the instinct to react, choosing love, choosing peace. Beautiful, Charlotte. That's such a set of tools that you provided. Thank you. Moses, it's great to hear from you. Thank you. Wanda writes that part of the problem is compartmentalizing. The way that we come to those immediate snap judgments and compartmentalize instead of having a more expansive way of looking at things. our wonderful Dr. and Mrs. Future, who created some of the videos you're going to see tonight, right? That it's important to remember to love each other during our disagreements. Charlotte also writes, curating and limiting influences which disrupt our peace is important. It's crucial, including social media, news, and negative people, negative energies. Absolutely. Janet Connell writes, are we here for nothing more than the human experience? We internalize this experience, but very much influenced by our programming. Dia, one of our regulars, writes, repeatedly throughout the day, and when I'm up at night, I instruct myself as lovingly as I can to suspend judgment. That translates into love first, no opinions, putting my ego in the back seat with a virtual helmet on its head, experiencing peace. That happens when I cease judging. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and read a couple more comments. And the golden rule is the cornerstone. Beautiful comments. Guru Nam Khalsa writes, when people know that which they believe is true, and others know that they have the truth and it is opposite, that becomes the danger. Yes, absolutely. So when, I loved what Jonathan was having to say about truth, and there is objective truth and subjective truth. And most people that go to war believe that God is on their side, that they have the truth. And that's why it's so important for us to find our common values. That's why I said, regardless, using vax as an example, whether you're pro-vax or anti-vax, we have the common truth that we want to be healthy. We want to be safe. We want to have personal freedom.
There's a term for, okay, in the 17th century, Protestants and Catholics in Europe slaughtered a third of Central Europe over their definition of Jesus' love. Let's get that. And there were a bunch of wonks like us got together and said, we've got to create institutions that will allow people to thrive with these different belief systems. We won't call them truths, because that degrades something very important. The truth that can be spoken and closed may not actually be the truth at all. The truth may not be expressible in words. It may be mysterious, shrouded in light and love, not shrouded in darkness. But nevertheless, let's just say their opinions and points of view were so incompatible that they were slaughtering each other. So in order to address that problem, in 1648, in a place called Westphalia, a bunch of people got together and said, let's create Protestant states, people who don't believe you need to go through the Holy Roman Empire's representatives to get to God, that an individual can have moral agency themselves, and Catholic states, so people who want to go through the Holy Roman Empire and the church and get to God will be separated. And that's the origin of the modern state. And that's how the state, before that, the modern state did not exist. The state was created to address the problem that you're addressing. And I would say that in today's world, we've reached a similar point in which our political institutions themselves are not commensurate with the different opinions and challenges we're facing. The Chinese model, which has been very effective in pulling several 100 million people out of gross poverty, doesn't respect individual rights and individual liberties and privacy. Our economic engine, based on selfishness, greed, and acquisition, doesn't do very much for the collective. We can learn from each other. But in order to get there in the way in the 17th century, we needed new institutions. I believe we need some new ideas to get there. And the idea that I'm committed to is called human security. Human security means that instead of looking at the pursuit of security through military and nationalism, we look at how do people actually live. They want to be safe. They want to have health. They want to be able to believe as they please. They want to be able to have clean air and water. And they want to survive. And the problems that we're facing in today's world cannot be solved at the level of the nation state. And as we continue in this competitive global environment, we will continue to degrade the health of the planet, causing more suffering. So we need a new paradigm of what constitutes security. And so the United Nations actually has a program that is going to be rolled out in the next year in a major way that I'm part of, to promote and mainstream the concept of human security.
Beautiful. I'm so loving what you're saying, and I've got to get us ready to go live on Facebook. But this is Jonathan Granoff, really appreciating all that you're sharing. And maybe even when during the main show, when you come back, you can talk a little bit more about that United Nations program. And thank you for the reminder about the birth of the Protestant church and the Protestant states. I really appreciate that. So it's a dynamic conversation. And thank you, everybody who wrote in the chat box. And please continue to write. I will save the chat, and anybody who wants the chat box, we'll make it available for you. And now it's time for me to get us ready for Facebook.
All right.